He spent 10 years saving a dying empire. Then that empire took less than 2 years to drag him out of his grave and destroy everything he had built. The man who gave the order was his own student, Zhang Juzheng, the most powerful man in the Ming Dynasty. Not the emperor, but someone who held more real authority than most emperors ever did. His story is not the familiar tragedy of a loyal minister wrongly accused. It is something more unsettling. A man who did everything right, got results, and was destroyed precisely because of it. To understand what happened, you first need to see what he was handed. By the mid-16th century, the Ming Empire still looked enormous from the outside, but inside it was falling apart. The treasury was bleeding money. The bureaucracy had become bloated and sluggish. The northern border faced constant threats. Tax collection across the provinces was so chaotic that the central government could not even calculate how much revenue it actually had. And the emperor was not paying attention. The Ming system was designed to concentrate all power in the emperor's hands. When the emperor was energetic and sharp, the machine ran well. But when the emperor was absent, too young, too disinterested, or too overwhelmed, the entire empire was like a vehicle still rolling forward with no one at the wheel. In 1572, the Wanli Emperor took the throne. He was 9 years old. A 9-year-old boy sitting at the center of an empire whose entire design assumed that center would be strong. Someone had to fill the gap. That someone was Zhang Juzheng. Zhang Juzheng did not appear out of nowhere. He had spent nearly 20 years navigating the imperial bureaucracy, carefully observing how power actually worked. He was brilliant from a young age, but he learned early that in the Ming system, talent alone was not enough. You also had to know when not to show it. He had watched too many gifted men get crushed for standing out too soon. So he chose a longer path: patience, accumulation, and waiting for the right moment. The moment arrived when Wanli took the throne. As Grand Secretary, Zhang Juzheng became the empire's de facto manager. The boy emperor was too young to rule. The Empress Dowager trusted Zhang Juzheng. The powerful eunuch Feng Bao allied with him. The three formed a stable triangle of power, and Zhang Juzheng was the one who actually got things done. He understood clearly that this window would not stay open forever. The emperor would grow up. The Empress Dowager would step back. His enemies at court were simply waiting for him to fall. He had to finish what he could while time allowed. He launched the performance evaluation system, a strict accountability framework for officials. In the past, local administrators could coast through their careers as long as nothing went visibly wrong. Zhang Juzheng changed the rules. Every policy directive came with a clear deadline, and failure to deliver meant demotion or dismissal. Overnight, the entire bureaucracy shifted from idle mode to deadline mode. Efficiency improved. But he also made an enemy of nearly everyone who had grown comfortable with the old ways. His fiscal reform was even bolder. He pushed through the single whip reform, consolidating the empire's tangled web of miscellaneous taxes into a single, standardized silver payment. This struck directly at local power brokers and entrenched interests. A chaotic tax system had served them well. The more confusing it was, the easier it was to skim from the margins. A clear system left them nowhere to hide. Zhang Juzheng did not care. His goal was not to make people happy. It was to keep the empire running. At the same time, he managed the young emperor's education with relentless discipline. Daily study schedules, classical texts, lessons in governance. He was not just running the empire, he was shaping the next person who would run it. His standards were exacting. When Wanli performed well, praise was rare. When Wanli fell short, correction was immediate. In Zhang Juzheng's mind, this was responsibility. A future ruler who would one day command the empire alone could not afford to be soft. In Wanli's mind, that answer would not reveal itself for years. During Zhang Juzheng's decade in power, fiscal order was visibly restored. Grain reserves filled up, silver revenues increased, and accounts that had been hopelessly muddled became clear. The borders stabilized. Bureaucratic efficiency improved markedly. An empire that had been sliding downhill was, at the very least, steadied. But this was not without cost. Land surveys disrupted entrenched interests at every level. The burden on ordinary people did not lighten everywhere. His reforms strengthened the state's capacity, but also increased pressure in parts of the countryside. And more critically, his personal power had swelled to a dangerous level. Here was the most bitter paradox of the Ming system. Its founding principle was clear: all power belongs to the emperor, and no one may rise above the throne. But when the emperor was a child, someone had to act in his place, or the empire would grind to a halt. And anyone who successfully performed the emperor's role inevitably started to look like exactly the kind of figure the system was built to prevent: an overpowered minister. The better he did his job, the more dangerous he became. Zhang Juzheng was not blind to this. He understood the risk perfectly well, but he chose to finish the work first and deal with the consequences later. Perhaps he believed that the student he had raised would eventually understand. In 1582, Zhang Juzheng died of illness. Wanli was 19. A young emperor who had been strictly managed for a decade suddenly found that the hand above his head was gone. Then the impeachments began. Minor accusations at first, that Zhang Juzheng had lived extravagantly, accepted gifts. Then the charges escalated: abuse of power, deceiving the emperor. Wanli did not suppress these attacks. He allowed them. Then he drove them forward. Less than 2 years after Zhang Juzheng's death, Wanli ordered his estate confiscated. His family was exiled. His eldest son killed himself in despair. Several family members starved to death. Every title, honor, and posthumous name Zhang Juzheng had received was stripped away. A man who had steered the empire for a decade was dismantled in death. The forces behind this destruction were tangled. From an institutional perspective, Zhang Juzheng's power had genuinely exceeded its bounds. He had done things only an emperor was supposed to do. Dismantling his legacy was the system correcting a structural violation and a necessary step for the young emperor to establish his own authority. From a political perspective, the bureaucratic factions Zhang Juzheng had spent a decade antagonizing finally had their opening. Impeachments flooded in like a tide that had been held back for years. And from a personal perspective, the impact of 10 years of strict oversight on Wanli's inner world is difficult to dismiss entirely. A young man raised under unyielding authority suddenly handed unchecked power. That psychological tension may not have been the sole cause of the purge, but it was almost certainly part of what fueled it. Institutional logic, political revenge, and personal emotion. 3 currents converging to tear apart one man's legacy. What makes the story even more painful is what followed. After Zhang Juzheng was purged, his reforms began to loosen. The performance evaluation system was no longer strictly enforced. The bureaucracy slowly drifted back to its old rhythms. The framework of the single whip reform survived, but its implementation weakened steadily. The fiscal gains he had built up were gradually spent down over the following decades. Wanli himself eventually refused to hold court for over 20 years. The empire slid back into the same unattended drift Zhang Juzheng had spent a decade fighting. The order he had spent 10 years maintaining quietly came undone after he was gone. Zhang Juzheng's tragedy was not that a good man was brought down by bad people. It was a structural trap. In a system that tied all legitimate power to the emperor alone, the moment the emperor reclaimed that power, whoever had been exercising it in his place became a threat. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because his very existence was a reminder that the emperor had once not truly been the emperor. This closes a loop that began at the founding of the dynasty. Zhu Yuanzhang abolished the chancellorship specifically to ensure that no minister could ever accumulate enough power to rival the throne. 200 years later, Zhang Juzheng's fate proved the deeper consequence of that design. When the emperor could not govern, the empire needed someone to step forward. But when the emperor stood up again, the one who had stepped forward had to fall. History has never lacked talented people. What it lacks are structures that allow talent to be exercised safely. When a system only permits the center to shine, anyone who lights a torch at the margins will sooner or later face the same question. The fire was yours, but the torch never was. Zhang Juzheng lit a fire. It burned for 10 years and illuminated the entire empire. Then the empire blew it out.